Okay, we are rolling. Overview of the Bible, Isaiah.
Okay, we left off last time with chapter 1 and actually that powerful verse of "Come, let us reason together," and the Lord wanting to make our sins, wipe them out, and take our red-like sins and make them white as snow. And so it's a wonderful verse, a wonderful reflection of the Lord's heart. What we do is pick up in chapter 2. We've just seen the pronouncements of judgment because the nation has really gone astray. And what's interesting, then we jump right into chapter 2, and we see one of the first really explicit in Isaiah declarations of the coming kingdom. And this is throughout the prophets. And here in chapter 2, in fact, chapter 2 of Isaiah, if you look, it's almost, some of it's identical to chapter 4 of Micah. The same things are said here. But what we see here is in chapter 2, I'm going to look at verses 3 and 4. And this is talking about the time when, well, I guess we could look at verse 2. Verse 2 says, "Now it will come about in that in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it." So here's this time when Israel becomes a place where everyone's coming. And it says, "Many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that He, God, may teach us concerning His ways, that we may walk in His paths, for the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And He will judge between the nations. He will render decisions for many peoples. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war." And so here is a declaration of that time when there comes a world peace, when Messiah is reigning in Jerusalem, where you can actually go there and get taught by Him. The nations of the earth, it says, would go to Jerusalem and be taught by the Lord as He establishes His kingdom on the earth. This is what the big prophetic hope was in Israel. And that's why when Jesus came and His disciples started thinking, "You're the Messiah," they started thinking, "Well, is it now, Lord? You're going to give the kingdom to Israel?" In fact, they said that just before He ascended into heaven. It's like, okay, is it now? Is it now? And then, boom, He's gone. Well, I guess that wasn't it. It wasn't what we were looking for. He's not sitting on His throne in Jerusalem, because there's a whole other thing that's coming, and Isaiah talks about that too. But here is that first kind of flash in Isaiah of the kingdom that's coming. There's an incredible kingdom that's coming. And the ultimate culmination of this kingdom, that when the Lord comes, it's to bring down some things in the earth. And what it basically deals with is the pride of man. What we look at here is a consistent over and over and over again how God is going to humble mankind. So it's not good to spend all your time getting proud and lofty and shove out your chest. I hear people say, "Well, you should see me when I get mad. People just don't want to get in my way." Well, that's not necessarily something you really want to brag about, because at some point the Lord's going to really judge that. He's coming against that. It says this specifically, starting in Isaiah 2:11. It says, "The proud look of man will be abased, and the loftiness of man will be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day." And then in verse 12, "For the Lord of hosts will have a day of reckoning against everyone who is proud and lofty, and against everyone who is lifted up, that he may be abased." Have you noticed the theme there? He's bringing down the proud. He's bringing down the arrogant. He's humbling the people. That's His judgment, is bringing humility. In fact, verse 17 goes on and says, "And the pride of man will be humbled, and the loftiness of men will be abased, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day." So the establishment of the Lord's kingdom is the time when He establishes Himself as the only one of real authority, and He brings down the arrogance of all other mankind. And so He sums up chapter 2 by saying, "Stop regarding man whose breath of life is in his nostrils, for why should he be esteemed?" What He's saying is, stop esteeming man. He can stop breathing any day now, and boom, who cares? He doesn't have any authority anymore. Nobody fears, they go into the cemetery and they look at somebody in the grave and say, "Oh, I'm really scared of that guy." No, He says, "Why are you esteeming man whose breath is in his nostrils?" And one day he's just going to be gone. So there's this declaration of the coming kingdom. Then there's a talking about when that kingdom comes, what will it deal with? And what it deals with is all of these years of human history where man has exalted himself and lifted himself up and promoted himself. who is it that's really submitted to the Lord's ways and come into His desires? You know, we see this reflected in the New Testament. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "The meek shall inherit the earth," or "the humble shall inherit the earth." You know, and so what He's showing here is the way that's going to take place. The humble will inherit the earth, or inherit, you know, that could be translated the land, and a lot of times it refers just to Israel itself, but the humble shall inherit that. So in the details of this judgment, as it goes through in some of the chapters there, and then we get to chapter 5 of Isaiah, and there's a story there about, I just touched my mic, I was really afraid I'd probably mess something up there. There's a story there that actually gets quoted by Jesus, and it talks about the vineyard owner arranging this vineyard, setting it up perfectly, you know, making all the provision, digging around, getting, you know, making sure it's in a fertile hill and everything's taken care of. And he plants it and takes care of it, turns it over to someone to oversee it. When he comes back, it doesn't produce good fruit. And Jesus quotes this in the New Testament, talking about the parable of the landowner who goes away. He leaves everything for the people, goes away, and comes back and finds out they've not been doing what they should. So there's the passage here about God has really given us what we need, but and then it shows how mankind usually doesn't do with it what God has made the arrangements for to bring forth the proper fruit. Getting past Isaiah 5, and Isaiah 6 is one of the more famous passages of the whole book, and it's when Isaiah has a vision of the throne room. And it starts out like this. It says, "In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of His robe filling the temple." We don't talk about trains like that very, but it's talking about the long flowing back of His robe. It's so big it fills the temple. And so he sees the Lord in His throne room, and he says, to start out, he says, "In the year of King Uzziah's death." I want to just comment on that. Maybe we'll end this session with this. In 2 Chronicles, that's right after 1 Chronicles back here, 2 Chronicles 26, should have had that marked. It says in verse 16 about Uzziah, "But when he became strong, his heart was so proud that he acted corruptly." Now Uzziah was basically talked about as being a pretty good king up to this point. He did away with all the worship except for the high places, like several of them did. But here he got proud in heart and he acted corruptly. And he says, "He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, for he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense." Interesting. "Then Azariah the priest entered after him with his 80 priests of the Lord, valiant men. And they opposed Uzziah the king and said to him, 'It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests and the sons of Aaron who are consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, and will have no honor from the Lord God.'" Well, here these priests are talking to the king like this. Well, he gets upset. But Uzziah, with a censer in his hand for burning incense, was enraged. And while he was enraged with the priests, the leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord beside the altar of incense. And so he gets enraged, but as he's enraged, he's been rebuked and said, "You don't have any right to be in this holy place, in the temple." I bring this up because Isaiah said, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord in His throne room, in His temple." And there's something connected here. Verse 21 says, "And King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death, and he lived in a separate house, being a leper, and he was cut off from the house of the Lord." And so, well, that ends with that. Well, so we see here that Isaiah, in this incredible prophecy here of seeing the Lord in Isaiah 6, he notes that it was in the day that King Uzziah died. Now, King Uzziah came into the holy place, to the throne room, to the Holy of Holies, essentially, not really the throne room, but the Holy of Holies. He was getting ready to go into the holy, or to present an offering in the holy place. Maybe not the Holy of Holies, but in the holy place. And so he comes in there, and he's not supposed to be doing this. And he breaks out in leprosy. And so when he dies, it's interesting to me that when he dies, that Isaiah then has this glorious vision of the glory of the Lord. He sees the glory of the Lord in the Lord's temple, and the Lord just fills the temple with His glory. And Isaiah is not suffering from any kind of leprosy or that kind of thing. In fact, he's just being filled with His glory. He's coming into that place under the Lord's directive, not under his own will. And so he's not defiant like Uzziah was, but he's coming in at the invitation of the Lord. In fact, the Lord is revealing himself, in contrast to Uzziah, who tried to come in on his own strength. And so it's interesting to me, Isaiah says, this vision happens in the year of King Uzziah's death.